Prologue. Vic West was never late, but today he was. 8 o'clock at the beach bar, he'd said, before the weekend crowds arrive from the city and before the Caribbean sun makes the sand too hot to walk on. They serve some of the best coffee in Venezuela at the bar. We can sit in the shade and talk undisturbed for a couple of hours, watch the sea and the girls walk by. West liked watching the girls. But it was gone 9 now, and Colonel Oliver Maidment still sat alone with a half-eaten cachito croissant and his 3rd cup of café negro, high-octane caffeine that would set his pulse racing for the rest of the morning. "Something big has come up," West had said. "Real important," he'd emphasized in that secretive way of his. But no details, not over the phone. So the chairman and chief executive had cancelled the board meeting of Portcullis Industries and Procurement, PLC, and taken the next available flight from Heathrow to Caracas, flying via Miami. A total of 20 energy-draining hours without sleep to get to the rendezvous, and then West doesn't show. For the umpteenth time, Maidment scanned the roadway and the beach. At least there could be worse places to wait. A strengthening sun was breaking up the high haze of cloud, the sea becoming bluer by the minute and sparkling like a floating bed of sapphires as each wave shrugged towards the shore. His eye caught the movement of the lone jogger as he ran along the waterline where the breakers foamed up the deserted strip of sand. Deserted? Not quite, Maidment realized. The music was carried on the offshore breeze from the multicolored parasol some 50 meters away, an upbeat bossa nova number. He looked and saw the garish towel and the splay of pink legs half hidden by the circle of shade. All right for some, he thought, and beckoned the morose barman. In his poor Spanish, Maidment said, "I'm waiting for a friend. I wonder if you saw him here earlier, before I arrived." The man grimaced as he tried to understand, as though the effort were causing him physical pain. "What is his name?" "Victor West, mid-50s, stocky and balding, with a heavy moustache." It sounded almost like a betrayal to describe his old friend in such unflattering terms, especially an ex-Royal Marine. He added, "He's a regular here, drinks King of Scots and Coke, likes to chat up the girls." Black, lifeless eyes appraised this tall, lean Englishman with his Panama hat, linen suit, and kidskin loafers. The barman looked directly at the sunburnt face and the head of crinkly brown hair that had given way to a receding crown, then met the cool green eyes. At length he said, "Your friend, he's a gringo?" Maidment shook his head. "No, not American, he's English." There was a fine distinction. The barman finally grunted in recognition. "Ah, yes, he comes most weekends. In fact, he was here yesterday evening when I closed it up." "I suppose he didn't leave a message?" He knew he was grasping at straws, but West had been adamant that they should meet urgently. "A message for Mr. Maidment? Or the Colonel, perhaps?" A shake of the head, irritated by this waste of time when he could be sitting down in the shade of the bamboo awning doing nothing. "No message. Your friend was with 2 other men, talking. Maybe he comes here tomorrow." Maidment ordered a batido fruit juice and watched the man go. Sure, mañana. That was a South American's answer to everything. Appointments were flexible things. Arrange a meeting and you could expect to wait half a day for someone to turn up without a word of apology, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. If you invite guests for supper, Vic West had once told him, don't be surprised if they turn up a week later expecting to be wined and dined. But West himself was never late. Something must have happened, something unavoidable. For all he knew, his friend's car had broken down, very likely given the state of repair of most vehicles in this country, or some unexpected and urgent meeting had been called by an important client. There would be a good reason. No doubt the man would show by lunch. In the meantime, Oliver Maidment had no intention of wasting his time. Collecting his briefcase from the hired car, he settled down to catch up with his paperwork. The company, of which he was now chairman and chief executive, had invited him to join the board soon after he'd stepped down from his parliamentary seat before the general election of 1987. His spell as a junior defence minister had been followed by the poisoned chalice of a parliamentary under-secretary post at the Northern Ireland office. Clearly he'd been banished to the political wilderness. That he would not return became evident when his daughter Sophie accidentally killed herself with a cocaine overdose at a society party in London. He was devastated by the loss, and by the lurid stories splashed across the front pages of the tabloid press. Life at Portcullis Industries and Procurement suited him. He was back amongst old military friends, many of whom he'd known from his days as colonel of one of the infantry line regiments. Out of the media gaze in all but the financial pages, he enjoyed working for the highly respected public company in a field that he knew well. Arms procurement, preferably of British manufacture but not necessarily, was the name of the game, selling to governments and police forces worldwide. Training was also given to foreign armies, together with security advice. The company was also involved in the highly specialised manufacture of related products, from surveillance equipment to one-off weaponry, and all with the matronly blessing of Her Majesty's government. On joining the company, he'd been surprised and delighted to find that Vic West was their sales representative in South America. The paths of the two men had crossed during the Falklands War. Then West, a former Royal Marines officer, was attached to the Secret Intelligence Service, while Maidment was a junior MOD minister. West's father, an English Jew, had been an engineer and had spent most of his life working in the Venezuelan oil fields. He married the daughter of a wealthy Peruvian businessman. Therefore the young Vic West spent his formative years in either Lima or Caracas, and his late teens and early 20s travelling the South American continent in search of adventure. By this time he'd become a fluent Spanish speaker. In 1964, at the age of 25, West had decided that the military life was for him and joined the Royal Marines. Later he passed selection for the Special Boat Squadron, which brought him into contact with the Intelligence Corps, to which he later transferred. By the time Argentina invaded the South Atlantic Islands, West had already served in several South American SIS stations as an acknowledged expert on the area. Maidment appreciated West's explanations of the Spanish-American psyche, and the two men became close acquaintances, if not yet good friends. That was to develop 5 years later, when the minister resigned his parliamentary seat after the tragic loss of his daughter. And it was to happen in the most bizarre of circumstances, which were to change Maidment's life and give him a renewed reason for living. In a word, revenge. Vic West was one of Portcullis's top salesmen. His quasi-diplomatic role with SIS had introduced him to the top echelons of politics and the military throughout South America. He was ideally placed to offer equipment and training schemes to governments anxious to fight left-wing guerrillas and the big drug barons. But it didn't stop there. West was well connected with people from so many walks of life that he was able to cash in further on the cocaine boom by also selling to the so-called drugs cartels and communist guerrillas, as well as their rival right-wing paramilitary death squads. These deals were secretly subcontracted to either Israeli or South African suppliers for a lucrative cut. West had good contacts with the intelligence services of both countries. Had this become public knowledge, there would have been amazement that Oliver Maidment, former infantry colonel and junior government minister, could have been party to such arrangements, especially after his daughter's tragic death while using cocaine. But both Maidment and West knew that if Portcullis didn't supply these people, then either the French or Belgians certainly would. Moreover, only they could guarantee that much of the intelligence they gleaned in the process would be fed back to West's old colleagues at the newly developing Global Issues Department of the Secret Intelligence Service. Some of that information would be horse-traded with their American cousins, the CIA, or the Drug Enforcement Administration, and others. Just to keep the favours square and the British profile high. When the situation was right, an arms or drugs shipment might be seized as a result. It gave both men satisfaction for a very special reason that only a handful of people knew.
"Some lunch?"
The barman's shadow fell across the papers on the table.
"Before the rush starts."
Maidment looked at his watch, surprised to see it was nearly 1. And still West hadn't shown. With concern beginning to grow, the colonel ordered an arepa maize pancake stuffed with squid and a can of polar beer. But when the meal came, he found he had no appetite for it. Glancing along the beach, he again noticed the multicoloured parasol. The sun had arced across the sky since the early morning, and shade no longer covered the body of the man who basked so contentedly face down on the towel. Even from that distance, Maidment could see how pink his skin was. The music still blared, but no one seemed to mind. Day trippers from Caracas now filled the beach and splashed in the shimmering sea. Queues were forming at the bar. Vic would have appreciated the long-legged office girls making the most of the weekend, all honey-skinned with sleek black hair. Not topless, though, like you'd see in Europe. Catholic modesty demanded the wearing of bikinis, no matter that the thin thongs cutting up between their buttocks left little to the imagination. Yes, Vic West would like that. But still he hadn't showed. Must be a reason. Must be. He just hoped that it was nothing serious like a road crash, an all-too-frequent occurrence in this country. Or something more sinister. But West, of all people, could look after himself. Then Maidment saw the telephone on the bar. Why hadn't he noticed it before? As local calls were free, he just had to dial the number of La Floresta Hotel where West usually stayed in town. A strident tone reverberated in his ear. Unobtainable. Bloody Venezuelan communications. Always changing the numbers and not telling anyone, including the subscribers themselves. It was a nightmare. What should he do? Drive back to La Floresta and risk passing his friend coming the other way? Then another thought occurred. Unusually, West hadn't used the 24-hour clock. Was it just possible he'd meant them to meet at 8 o'clock in the evening, after things got quiet, not before, and he'd just misunderstood? Not impossible, and it would certainly explain his non-appearance. Feeling more reassured, Maidment decided he needed some exercise to take his mind off things. After locking his attaché case in the trunk of his hired car, he left a message with the barman for West to await his return. Then he began to stroll along the beach drag. The wind was gusting in off the sea now, taking the edge off the sun's fierce heat. It was pleasant for walking, and Maidment found himself relaxing, thinking back over the years during which he and Vic West had shared the secret. In fact, he walked farther than he'd intended, and when he returned along the waterline, the beach had started to empty. The sky was clouding over, and his elongated shadow had lost its sharpness. There was now a chill edge to the breeze. His legs were beginning to ache, and he was thankful to glimpse the yellow, blue, and red flag wind-ragged and snapping on the pole by the bamboo bar. Almost certainly West would be there by now. Unconsciously, his pace quickened. It was then that the sudden darting movement up ahead caught his eye. Momentarily he thought it was a scavenging dog, before he glimpsed the torn short trousers and brown legs of the urchin boy as he scampered away from the multicoloured parasol. He realized instantly what had happened. The young thief had stolen something from the sunbathing man while he slept. "Stop!" Maidment yelled and began to run. It was an instinctive reaction. He had never believed in passing by when someone was in trouble. But after a few paces he slowed, his feet sinking deep into the soft sand. There was no way he could catch the youngster. It was stupid even to try at his age. He turned towards the parasol. At least he could tell the man, give him a description of the boy. For all the good that would do. There were thousands of deprived kids like him surviving off their wits in the barrio slums of Caracas. As he approached, Maidment became aware that the sound from the radio, which had been blasting out salsa rhythms earlier in the day, had faded to a murmur as the batteries ran down. No attempt had been made to move the parasol since the morning, and the man had been lying unprotected in the harsh sun for most of the day. The colonel shuffled to a halt, and his mouth went suddenly dry as he looked down at the body. The skin on the back, with its thick mat of dark hair around the shoulders, was the colour of rare steak and bubbling with clusters of small white blisters, some not so small. A knot of apprehension tightened in Maidment's gut. Somehow the man looked familiar. The chunky, short build, the thick legs and the curling grey hair around the nape of the neck.